You've heard the advice to speakers and speechwriters, tell a story. It's good advice, but you don't want to tell just any story. You need to find a story that takes your audience on a journey from where they are at the beginning of your message to where you'd like them to be at the end of it. And to accomplish that, your story has to become their story. It takes a special kind of alchemy to pull off that kind of transmutation, and that magic is at the heart of a terrific new book by Tamsin Webster called Find Your Red Thread. Tamsin is a keynote speaker and message strategist. She's worked with folks like Johnson & Johnson, Harvard Medical School, and Intel, as well as with startups in everything from pharma to climate tech. She's a professional advisor at the Martin Trust for MIT Entrepreneurship and a mentor for the Harvard Innovation Labs. If you've ever wondered what you'd get if you combined 20 years in marketing, 13 years as a Weight Watchers leader, and 4 years as a TEDx executive producer, she's the answer. And it turns out that what you get is someone who understands the power of story to move people to make big changes. And Tamsin is my guest on this episode of the Leadership Communications Podcast. I'm Rob Cottingham. Episode 70. Tamsin Webster on Finding Your Red Thread. Tamsin, I first heard you back at the big HubSpot mega conference, and you gave a presentation that in many ways changed the way I think about moving people to action. And I am just delighted that you've come out with this book. It's called Find Your Red Thread. So let me start off by asking, what is a red thread and why should we go looking for it?
Well, the direct answer is the red thread is the story that your brain builds to make things make sense of the world. I borrow the idiom from Swedish and Nordic languages. They use it to mean exactly that. What's the big idea? What's the big message? And as I went exploring both the idiom and how to create that kind of through line for other people, I discovered that the red thread that gave the idiom its name was a beautiful name for the process as well. So it's really how we make sense of the world, the connection that we create between a question and an answer.
And how do people use the red thread when they're trying to communicate an idea to people? How do you in particular use the red thread?
Well, I use the red thread to make sure that the idea is complete in someone's mind. In other words, making sure that someone hears both the answer, which is what the idea represents, and the question that it satisfies for the person that I'm talking to. I think a lot of times we end up leading only with our answer. You should do this. And sometimes not even prompted by a question from somebody else. But I think a lot of times when we do provide kind of the problem that our idea solves, it's a problem that we see, and it's not a problem that people that we talk to see. It's not answering a question they currently actively have right now. So the process of the red thread is really about making sure that you are always building not just your case for your ideas and the changes you're trying to create, but you're building your audience's case, why they would argue for themselves about why what you're asking them to do makes sense to them based on how they see the world right now.
This idea of crafting the story that people will tell themselves about your idea as opposed to just shoving ideas at them. I mean, unsolicited advice always working so well. This is what really grabbed me from the very beginning about that. And it strikes me that there are an awful lot of speakers who go off the rails just at that point where they don't understand.
Oh, yeah.
They don't think through what the story is the audience is going to tell themselves. They're just thinking message. Is this something that you found with a lot of people that you work with, and as you start working with them, that they're in that place and you need to move them?
It's all the people, because everybody's an expert in their idea. I mean, you know this stuff because you've studied this, you do this work yourself, Rob. We all suffer from the curse of knowledge, and that inability or that tendency to be to not be able to imagine what it was like not to know the thing that we know, which means that when we focus on our message, we tend to focus on it from the perspective of somebody who already agrees that it's right. So this is the thing that I think it is absolutely the thing that my clients and really anybody struggles with the most, is that innate hardwired tendency to say, well, why should you do this thing? Because I think it's the thing to do. I mean, if you boil down a lot of our arguments, they really come down to that. And so it can be challenging. And I really hope that the red thread is designed to help it make it just slightly less challenging for people to really say, okay, if I didn't already believe this was right, what would be the steps that I would have to go through to become convinced that it was right? And that's really, those are the steps that the red thread is designed to walk people through.
And tell me about those steps. As I understand it, there are 5 key components to a red thread.
There are five components, and they map to what I said before, that the red thread is the story that your brain builds. And it isn't necessarily a once upon a time, there was a boy named Harry, and it turned out he was a wizard. We're constantly looking for what's going on, why is it happening, cause and effect. And so that's really what those elements are. And so what I did was I reverse engineered from story, all kinds of stories, to figure out, at least based on, what would be useful for me and the people I work with, what are the core elements that are in every story and in every kind of story. And so, yeah, there are 5. The first is establishing a goal, because that's where the action of a story really starts. There may be context, but that sets everything up. But we really start to engage with the story and an idea the minute that we understand that there's something about it that in a story, that there's something that the main character wants but doesn't yet have. And so we map that over to ourselves. If we hear a message is going to give us an answer, for instance, to a question that we want an answer to, but don't have, then the action of that same story starts in our brain. So the first is establishing that goal. The second is introducing a problem that the main character, or in this case, your audience, doesn't know they have in the first place. The trick is, I know you've read the book, but the trick is doing it in such a way that doesn't make the person you're talking to feel stupid or not, or wrong,
or talked down to,
or talked down to, or whatever. We actually have to validate their current perspective and create a new one for them. So introduce a problem that someone didn't know they have. That creates conflict and tension, and that's the engine of all stories, because our brains don't like tension. And then the next piece actually drives that tension to a breaking point. So the third piece, after the goal and the problem, is something I call the truth, which is a short for the moment of truth, because that's the moment where a main character discovers the true nature of their circumstances. And in that moment, that puts their goal, the thing that they want, in jeopardy. And it forces them to choose something. It forces them to choose to give up what they want. It forces them to deny the reality of their situation, or ideally, it forces them to choose a slightly different perspective that allows them to do something different. So goal, problem, truth. With that truth, we've got this incredible conflict now in people's mind. And so we need to give them closure. And we do that with the change, which is the big shift in thinking or behavior. And then once we've got that closure, we need to give people confidence to move forward. And we do that with the actions, the specific steps that make that change real and concrete. So goal, problem, truth, change, action.
And I like that this is geared to mobilizing people towards that change and that action. Classic storytelling often is geared to understanding or entertainment, but there's a very specific purpose here. You actually want to mobilize people for change. And it strikes me right now that, for instance, in communications around vaccination and dealing with vaccine hesitancy, that problem in particular, where you're having real compassion for your audience and where their perspective is right now. And I think that compassion is critical in helping people to bridge, because so much of the messaging right now is so often confrontational, and these people are dumb and stupid and bad and awful and they should be thinking this.
Right.
There's a bridge building thing at work here that I think really helps in mobilizing change.
I never talk about it openly in the book at all, but this book is essentially a way to operationalize what's known as radical empathy. The ability to adopt somebody else's perspective and argue for it so well that that they would argue that it's theirs too. And we're doing it in the purpose of your own idea. But it's really a lesson I learned. Oh my gosh. Well, my first job out of grad school, it was a brief but enduring turn as a change management consultant. So it's always been something I'm very, very interested in professionally, but I got really personally interested in it when I became a Weight Watchers leader, which I started, I was one for 13 years. And I guess I started about 21 years ago now. I was so fascinated by the tension between what change communications, crisis communications, management communications, all the things that I'd studied and gotten degrees in, what they said you were supposed to do, and what I could see day to day, week to week actually worked when I talked to people about making a major change in their life. And when you have to put your message to that kind of test, because when you're a marketer, you can just kind of put stuff out there and you're like, it works. I'm sure people clicked on stuff. You don't see the people that you're talking to day in, day out, week in, week out. You don't actually get to see whether or not it actually works. But that's the delightful situation I had when I was a Weight Watcher leader, because I could see literally in the actual sense whether or not the message worked, because I could see it in whether or not people came back week to week. I could see it in whether or not they made the changes in thinking and behavior. I could see it in whether or not they were achieving whatever health goals they had set for themselves. And so often what worked was completely counterintuitive to what I had been, well, not necessarily counterintuitive, but counter to what I had been taught was the way, quote unquote, to get people to change. But one of the things that I say in the book is that you can't do that. You can't make people change. You can't create change. The best you can hope for is to create the ideal conditions in which they choose to change on their own. That's the only way to create a change that actually lasts.
There is the old joke about how many therapists it takes to change a light bulb, and first the light bulb has to want to change.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yes. Light bulb, that's true.
You've helped a whole lot of people reach bigger audiences and move those audiences. Can you tell me a little bit about your work, particularly around TEDx? Because I know that's kind of the holy grail for a lot of people who are speaking. And if I could just land a TED Talk.
Oh, just do that. Yeah, TED for me, and TEDx Cambridge in particular, TEDx Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is where I was formerly the executive producer, and I'm currently the idea strategist, going on, oh my gosh, 8+ years now. It is the intersection of all the areas of my life, and this is why I think I love it so much. It is first and foremost an enclave of experts, and these are my people. I love big ideas. If I had a muse in the form of an animal, it would be a magpie. Find shiny things. For me, ideas are shiny things. So I'm like an intellectual magpie, just gotta find. So I love these big ideas, and I hate how much experts struggle to articulate them. And so to be able to give, to be in the wonderful opportunity, being able to give them this challenge of working with these deeply expert people, particularly at TEDx Cambridge, we draw very heavily from Harvard and MIT, but also from academia. Most of our speakers are doctorates multiple times over sometimes. And yet through TEDx, they have this lay audience that they need to speak to. It may be an intellectual audience, and maybe a highly educated audience, but it's not the same thing as a scientist talking to a scientist. It's different. It's just fundamentally different. The Red Thread actually got its start with TEDx Cambridge. It was initially tested with all those scholars and academics. And I'm glad that it had that kind of forged in the fire testing first, because that it made it as strong as it could be, as quickly and as early as it could be, so that I've had the luxury really of the last 3 to 4 years since it kind of stabilized in its current form, just to test it and hone it, so that it is, I can feel very confident now that it is in fact the most efficient and effective way that I have found to help someone narrow into and articulate the distinctive and differentiated power of their idea.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I love that work. I mean, it's pro bono. So when I'm in the thick of doing it, sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this? And then I'll have this fascinating conversation with somebody about mitochondria or brain mapping, or, how the singularity happened 200,000 years ago. It's not coming, it's already done. And then I just this is why I do this, because it's just so flippant fascinating. I'm always somebody who's loved school. I've loved it. And I just, to be able to learn from these amazing people every day, it's just this wonderful thing.
It must be great being at the actual TEDx night and seeing the light bulb go on in audiences' faces as they get the idea.
Yeah, it's magical. And also those audiences are pain in the butt. But they are all, but here's why, because they are also part of the reason why the Red Thread is what it is right now, and how it got to be the way that it is, and helped me sharpen some of my understanding about certain things. Is that particularly the TEDx Cambridge audience is very well educated, and very well informed. And what would happen is that we would have these beautifully articulated ideas, and they're like, "Yeah, heard it." And I was like, "No, you have not," because the sneaky trap of building somebody else's case for your idea is that if done well, it's going to feel to them like they always thought that way. If you're not careful about pointing out that this is in fact different than what you were doing before. So yeah, the delightful audience, which, my thanks to those literally thousands of people who are like, "I've seen it before. I heard it on This American Life." And I'm like, no, you didn't. No, you 100% full stop did not. But it really taught me how important it is to make sure, when we're talking about turning an idea into a presentation or into a talk, so I know you do a lot of this work too, that there are these moments where you make sure that you are very discreetly, ETE, talking and articulating for the audience how this is different than what you've done before. I mean, you can't tell them it's different. You have to show them it's different. And that's a lesson that the audience has taught me.
I've done some stand-up comedy, and one of the things that I found is the really great appreciative audiences, those are the ones that leave me on, walking out on a high. But it's the tough audiences where you really hone your material, because you end up sticking with only the stuff that works.
That's right. You don't have a choice. And that's, that was, for me, like I said, I'm so grateful to the audiences, but also to the TEDx folks themselves, because, I am not in academia. I would like to think that I have an academic mind. It's my want. Give me 2 seconds and $90,000 and I'd go get a doctorate in a second. But I think of all the people who have met this approach and have worked with it, the people's opinion that I value the most has been theirs. And, there is, when these people whom I look up to and respect so much come back to me and they say, "Oh my gosh, this is a revelation. I will never write I'll never write or teach the same way again after doing it this way." I can't even express how much that means to me, because their ideas are so important. Everyone's ideas are so important that it pains me. And I would suspect you, as somebody as a lover of words and communication, it pains me that something is in a way, both as simple and as complicated as words would be the reason why an amazing idea doesn't get the attention it deserves. And so when I seem to have landed on a thing that helps do that, it was so important for me to figure out, how do I get that to more people? Because the ideas are more important than anything. So how could I help more people get those big ideas out there? And hopefully the Red Thread is a way to help people do that.
Well, and it's never been more important for ideas that are robust, that are well thought through, and that can stand up to scrutiny, that those ideas get a fair shake out there, because there is so much noise right now. So I think the book is going to help with it. Your work has helped tremendously with that. For folks who want to follow all things Tamsen Webster, how can they do that?
I am literally the only Tamsen Webster in the universe, so it's not difficult to find me. I know, thanks.
Well done.
Mom and dad and husband. Yes, the combination is magical. So not hard to find me. Easiest thing to remember probably is redthreadbook.com, which will get people right to the Red Thread book, and also will land you on my website so you can explore more from there.
Tamsen, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Oh, what a pleasure. Thanks so much, Rob.
That's it for this episode of the Leadership Communications Podcast. Thanks again to Tamsen Webster for joining us. You can check out past episodes at robcottingham.ca/podcast or wherever you get your podcasts. Send me your comments on Twitter. I'm ROBCOTTINGHAM, or on Facebook at facebook.com/robcottingham page. Music for this episode is by Lee Rosevere, and it appears under a Creative Commons non-commercial, maybe you do want to pull at that thread license. Find more of Lee's music at leerosevere.bandcamp.com. I'm Rob Cottingham. Thanks for listening. Speak well and stay well, and we'll talk next time.